In today's video, I'll show you how to paint this simple stylized potion in a few steps, starting from the base colors, then adding shadows, highlights, and details in the end. If you want to try it yourself, download your free materials, including the sketch, color swatches, and a short guide. I'm starting with selections and dividing the parts on the potion with base colors. So the easiest way for me to do that is by selecting the main shape and creating clipping masks with the rest of the potion. So when it comes to dividing the parts of the same painting, I always use a selection tool, whether that is a lasso tool or this magic wand tool that automatically selects the same tones and colors on one layer. So this is way more precise and it creates cleaner edges rather than painting it with a brush. With the clipping masks, I make sure to paint the inside of the base shape, but I have the freedom to modify each layer. I made a separate layer for each part of the potion because later on it was easier to paint them and to modify them if needed. Sometimes I go crazy with layers and sometimes I paint everything on one layer, so it really depends on the mood, to be honest. By the way, this was supposed to be a step-by-step tutorial on how to paint this potion using Photoshop, but I decided not to promote it directly since their latest terms of service update. At least until they resolve and address the problem. I'm not going into too much detail, but I just recommend you use Krita as a free and good alternative. Alright, after I was done with the base colors, it was time to add some shadows. But first I divided the painted parts from the base shape. You could do that from the beginning, definitely, but for some reason I find this way more efficient for me. Now that I had everything as its own base shapes, I started to add layers for the shadows. By color picking the main color, you want to increase the saturation a little bit and decrease the brightness. I even went a little bit towards the purple to create a more interesting color for the shadows. In this case, I decided that the light was coming from the right top corner, so with that in mind, I painted the shadows on the left side of the potion. You will always have another source of light that bounces from the surroundings, but the main light is the one responsible for the position of highlights and shadows. According to that, I'm painting the rest of the potion. And now we are moving on to highlights. To get the highlight color, I color pick the main color again, and on the sliders increased the brightness and decreased the saturation for this liquid part. You don't have to always decrease the saturation for the highlights, but in this case I wanted this liquid part to be a little bit brighter. For the liquid part, keep in mind that this material reflects the light. So the middle part would be very bright because the light is coming from the top, and the highlights would reflect from the bottle as well. So speaking of a bottle, because it's glass, it would also reflect the color from the liquid. This is maybe a little bit complicated to explain, but as you can see, with a big brush stroke and soft round brush, I slightly painted around the liquid with the same pink color to create that reflection on the bottle. Okay, now moving on to this wooden heart. I won't go into too much detail about the wood texture. You can watch the full tutorial for this material here, but I just kept it really simple with this one. I try not to overdo it, and that's why I like to use a brush that has an opacity. And with that brush, I created some random strokes on the heart, and once I was happy enough, I went back and darkened the grooves of the wood. I added the highlights according to the light source, but you will see me later going back to this part and fixing the shadow color. For the bottle cork, I also kept it very simple by only adding a gradient to indicate where the shadows and highlights are. You can go crazy with this one, feel free to do that if you want, but I also didn't want it to be too similar to the wooden heart sign, so I just kept these two parts divided, let's say. So for the shadows and highlights part, I always use a soft round brush since it creates really soft blend without hard edges. And as you can see, with these little holes in the cork, it's important to consider the light source. So if the light is coming from the right, that side would be in shadow because it's hidden from the light source, while the left side would be lighter because the light is directly hitting that part.
For the strings, I only highlighted the right sides of them.
In the middle of the process, I decided to separate the bottom and upper parts of the bottle just to have more freedom with rendering them. And again, I'm thinking about how this material would reflect the light and colors. And it is time to add final highlights and make the bottle pop more. I'm adding these big highlights on the edges using the hard round opacity brush. So as you can see, I'm really using only soft round brush and this hard round opacity brush because these two brushes give me the best results that I want. And as you can see, this one was trial and error until I made it right, but I also used the transform tool and modified the shape of the highlights to fit the bottle. So don't worry if this one doesn't look good from the first try. After that, I just used an eraser with the soft edge and erased the excess. And I repeated the same steps for the other side. Alright, and finally, some finishing touches. Even though you can see me painting this golden handle here because I kind of forgot about it in the process. But to simplify and shorten the process of painting, I used multiply blending mode for the shadows and screen mode for highlights on the top. For this white highlight in the front of the bottle, I use an overlay blending mode because soft light was too light in my opinion at first, and I really wanted to make these highlights pop, you know. So on the same overlay layer, I painted these smaller highlights. You have to be careful when you're painting in these modes because it can easily become too dark or too saturated, you know. So just use a soft round brush and maybe lower the opacity to have more control. And don't forget to paint the bottom part of the cork, which is inside of the bottle, which I definitely kind of forgot. This is my favorite part when I merge all the layers, so I can add the final details and apply them together. You don't have to do that, I just love to declutter my layer panel at the end, but I still keep the whole process copied in one group, so don't worry. But yeah, I changed the background color, and by using screen blending mode, I painted some rim light on the left side of the potion. As you can see, it's way easier to paint everything on one layer. And then with a soft round brush, I painted some light with the same pink coming from the behind and add some sparkles and made them pop a little bit more with a soft light blending layer just to make it more fantasy and stylized. And for the very last final touch, I added one more multiply layer mode and just slightly added a shadow through the whole potion. And that's it for this video and this painting process. Thank you so much for watching. If you found some useful information here, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I always like to see what you have to say in the comments and answer all of them. And please do that to help me out in this algorithm crazy game. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye bye.